It says not connected or not available. Does it usually light up?
Yes, it always lights up. It's a big red light.
Yeah. Oh. My phone's going off. Hold on, you don't need to turn that. Don't turn it. Please, don't turn it. Dad.
Don't turn it.
No, stop turning it. Great. No, I need to. What did you do? No, it's too much. It's fine right there.
It's lit up,
Oh my gosh.
We'll have to do a test another time.
I hear it now on my phone.
Yeah, we're here now. What'd you do?
I don't know. I'm gonna go back in my room.
Alrighty. Can you hear anything now down with the tower? Alright, good. Alright, welcome to Healing X Outreach Radio. I am your host, Augustin Estacio, and this is our first time trying to do live streaming on YouTube, and trying to finagle also with the podcast at the same time. And so I guess we're on and everything is well. My daughter is really trying to get me up to speed with technology. I'm not exactly I'm not even a beginner at this. I'm pretty bad at this. So it looks like, okay, good. Alessandro's on, down with the tower, can hear me. Everybody can hear me. And all I need is one little piece of equipment right over here. And I will talk a little bit about the topic that we're having today. And a little bit about what we're going to have next week. So next week, I had advertised on YouTube. I did a video yesterday. Unfortunately, it was a little bit of a false advertising. It's not for today. I was going to have my former pastor, Chris Ogney, and Beth Ogney on. And we were going to talk about homosexuality. We're going to talk about it within the confines of Christianity, gay unions. And also a little bit about why the XJW community sort of embraces, I guess, gay marriage and criticizes the Watchtower Society for its stance on gay marriage, and yet what the Watchtower Society, out of any area that the Watchtower Society would have that we would think that we probably shouldn't condone would be their stance on gay marriage, because they are pretty much doing the same thing that any other normal church does, except for of course, the process of shunning. Okay. Alrighty. Oh, don't show. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, of course I wouldn't do that. Alrighty. So yeah, my daughter was just telling me basically our studio that I shouldn't go on the studio page. And so, but I will say that if you do want to come on and if you want to talk to us, they hate the light. Yeah, okay, I hear you, Alessandro. And so XJW from I can hear. Okay, great. Okay, that's down with the tower. I've been doing this for 20 years now in the counter-cult apologetics arena. And, of course, things have changed. Huh?
Just need to check if we can pause the stream.
Alrighty, hold on for a second, folks.
Doesn't look like it. Well, you can hide this if you ever need to go to the studio.
What was that?
This turns off that.
Oh yeah.
Okay, good. Yes, please do that. That's much better for. That's much better for me.
Yeah. Well, it's privacy issues. So.
Yeah. I want them. I want the background so that way I can go on my studio page. So that's better. All right, great. All righty. Like I said, we're doing this for the first time, and so we're trying to get all the glitches out. This is our first time doing this. Hopefully this will become more habit forming. I've done some Facebook Live events. Of course, I've been on Blog Talk Radio, which is on iTunes for years. And now we are, of course, on YouTube, and we're trying to concentrate our I guess, our three forms of social media now and working them together. I wanted to talk a little bit, first of all, about our guest that we've had on here, Dr. David Lamb and Dr. Paul Copan on as the God of the Old Testament of Jerk. And I had him, if you have not heard or seen those videos, Dr. David Lamb is in our video archive. If you subscribe to our channel, please do a Healing X Outreach here on YouTube. If you're, of course, on podcast radio, if you like to listen to podcasts, both of those are available. Dr. Paul Copan's interview will be going up after this podcast, after this hour and a half today on YouTube, and it will be going up so that you can actually hear it on YouTube. For those of you, of course, which concentrate on YouTube as your form of social media. But if you want to have a discussion with me at the same time today, you want to dial in at 1-347-934-0379. That's 1-347-934-0379.
Did you turn it back on?
Huh?
You turned it off.
No, I didn't. I just went to my studio screen, which is
Okay.
now it should be another tab on here. It's not on a whole different, but it's you know. So, all righty. Okay, like I said, we've got a whole lot of glitches we're working on here. But there's a couple things I want to first of all congratulate those at the protest that they did over Europe. I think that was actually, it looks like it was a lot better organized than here in the States, here at Warwick, which I was a part of, and it looks like they were probably even a lot more effective. And I think that also the witnesses there in Europe seemed to be a little more receptive to the protest. Of course, people were not as receptive at Warwick. We had people honking horns, but we were not like in a really public place. I think that the days prior where people were out in the public in the town of Warwick, that they probably got more of a response. I wasn't there for that part. I was just there for just the protest at Warwick. So, but it looks like that in Europe, things went a lot better. I think also it has something to do with the fact that foreigners are a lot more. Chris Agnew, who I'll have next week, he once said that foreigners tend to be from other countries a lot more accommodating than here in the United States, where we're kind of rude and brash and candid or blunt, and our etiquette is a lot different than in other countries where the etiquette is probably at a more premium as far as treating people with respect. But so kudos to them over there, up there in I guess in London, where they had the protests in the United Kingdom. The other thing I wanted to mention is in the next 2 weeks we're going to have, like I said, next week we're going to have the topic of gay unions in the church and why is it that Christians, at least mainstream Christianity, does not accept gay unions. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't accept gay people into the churches, but why we don't accept gay unions. And I know that there have been some struggles by, I know people that I know that have come out of the cults that have, adopted Christianity, but now are probably moving more towards liberal Christians, so Christianity, which is a small percentage of Christianity in their acceptance of LGBT issues. And I think that a lot of reasons why ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-cultists, particularly the XJW community, finds the issue of LGBT issues more accepting is I think that part of it is, first of all, is that ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly activists, have not totally embraced mainstream Christianity, and there are reasons for that. Many of us, mostly, are atheists, and Alessandra, I had to go to my studio, which is on another page, so I might blank out here or there when I want to go ahead and take some people that are calling in. But I'm pretty much trying to stay here in this on the YouTube Live suite. Anyway, so I can understand why so many activists who have not really fully formed their views as far as the Bible's concerned have not really embraced Christianity. What?
The screen is on.
Yeah, it's off.
It's black.
What do you mean the screen is? You mean I have to have the other screen on?
Let me show you. See how it's black? That's what they see.
Oh, okay. Well,
Just hit this eyeball right here.
bummer. Alrighty. Well, it's still black.
It's black.
That's the delay. It'll update pretty soon.
Okay, it takes a while to update.
Yeah. A couple of seconds.
Alrighty. Yeah, I see it. It's updating. There we go. Boom. Alrighty. Alright, sorry about that, folks. It says, on the back screen it's black, though. I guess it's all updating. Yeah. There's a black screen.
It's all updating.
Okay, yeah, it's all updating. Okay, so my 10,000 windows. There we go. All 10,000 now are updating. Yeah, so I think that coming out of the cults, specifically the Jehovah's Witnesses, you will have a tendency, first of all, to be negative towards Christianity. That's one of the things. It's real easy to still have that mantra of religion is a snare and a racket. Okay, I hope you guys can see me now. Like I said, we're trying to work out these glitches, and probably the only people that are not seeing the glitches are the people that are on Blog Talk Radio right now listening to us, because it's audio, not video. All right, yep, there you go. So that's the whole point. I saw somebody was trying to get in on the phone. So that is that many of us coming out of the Jehovah's Witnesses have a negative mantra towards Christianity because that's what we were taught, and we may not even realize it that we're still thinking like a Jehovah's Witness. Some of us will always think like a Jehovah's Witness. I still think like a Jehovah's Witness at times. Me and my wife do at times. We talk about things when we're like, yeah, wow, this is the way we would think as witnesses when we come up against certain situations. And it takes a long time to get out of that Jehovah's Witness think mindset, as I'm sure it would be the same for Mormons or any other cult. But the fact is now that stage, that opportunity for us to actually get out of that cult mindset, which might take sometimes a year, maybe months, maybe a week, or maybe several years. We don't have that anymore now with online activism. And online activism has basically given people a voice, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes it can be, because sometimes some of us activists are so still critically damaged by the cult that we may not realize it, that we haven't really changed that much. We've just given our voice a different inflection. That is that we may think we don't think like Jehovah's Witnesses, but we may operate in our activism much like Jehovah's Witnesses. And some parts of our activism is helpful, and some parts it's negative. I'm sure that that's the case because there's no silver bullet in helping Jehovah's Witnesses. I've never said that I have the silver bullet or anybody else does. Really, helping a Jehovah's Witness doesn't mean that you know, because they've come out of the watchtower that they are no longer indoctrinated. That's a false assumption or assertion to think that those that have come out of the watchtower society are still, you know, that they are free from the watchtower. And so I think that that's one of the assumptions we make. And some of us who have YouTube channels are still really thinking a lot like Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, some of us, because now we have followings, and that's what YouTube allows a following. It's funny because that's the word that's used sometimes. Sometimes it's subscribers. I know that on Facebook, you can have people that will follow your page, and you'll have so many followers. You'll have on Blog Talk Radio or iTunes people that are subscribers and followers, and it's funny that it uses that terminology. But yeah, you now have people that will listen to your voice and will now actually use you as a guide, and some of us are probably not prepared for that. And what I mean by that, we're not prepared for that, is that we haven't healed ourselves. We haven't given ourselves time to heal. And so we're quickly, because we are in a social media world now, things that took time years ago when, I'll give you an example. I'm going to date myself. You know, the days of Bill and Joan Setner. Bill and Joan Setner started a conference retreat for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses called Witnesses Now for Jesus. And Dr. Walter Martin used to come to the mountain up there in New Ringo, Pennsylvania, and it's still going on. Joan no longer hosts it, and of course Bill hosted it with Joan for a while, and then he passed away, I believe, in the 1980s, somewhere around 84, 83. And then Joan took on the mantle of hosting this retreat. And so she took on that mantle, and now she's passed it on to 3 other gentlemen that have, you know, want this legacy or this ministry to continue up on the mountain. And it's not nowhere near as effective as it used to be. They right now put some of the testimonials and talks on YouTube. You know, I think it's called WNFJ 2008 is their channel, and you can see the testimonies of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that embrace Christianity and some of the debunking of the doctrines of the Watchtower Society. Well, some of us have different forms of activism, and I'll tell you what, I can appreciate some of the things in the different forms of activism, though they're not Christian, and I don't consider myself an activist. I consider this a ministry. For example, I think I was watching John Cedar's channel the other day, and he's an atheist. But John Cedars does some pretty good stuff, you know, especially on social issues and the Watchtower Society. I can really appreciate some of the things. And I think one of the things that I was watching was his whole diatribe on Serena Williams and if she's a Jehovah's Witness and why does she do certain things, and why does she refer to Jehovah in some of her, and of course recently she supported Colin Kaepernick on his, you know, taking a knee to the Pledge of Allegiance. Naturally, of course, most people don't know why she would support Colin Kaepernick is because she's never, you know, herself, she's never accepted, of course, the national anthem because she was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, even though she's not a baptized Jehovah's Witness. So he covered it from head to toe, all about Serena Williams on his channel. He did an excellent job, and John has done a couple. Lloyd Evans has done a couple of good things, and in some respects, he's been a little bit of an enemy of Christianity. But I find that now lately, from what I've gathered from his channel, is that he's even had an evangelical on his channel, as far as the evangelical, what he's doing as far as reaching those at their on street work. You know, those people that have their little signs lit, and there's an evangelical that approaches them in England. So I think that what's happened is Lloyd has softened his. He was going in a militant atheism direction for about a minute, and he has since softened himself. And he still has his criticisms about the Bible and Christianity, but he doesn't go against Christianity as if it's some type of cult. On the other hand, so he recognizes Christianity as mainstream and not a threat to other people's freedoms. Now, on the other hand, there are some who are theists on the YouTube activism movement, I guess, amongst ex-Jehovah's Witness activists, that are theists, and some who actually would say they believe in Jesus, and yet it would seem they hold to a form of Gnostic Christianity, yet they have been very aggressive in their criticism and attack on mainstream Christianity or historic Christianity. And I proposed, doctrines, and question the Bible, and even question Christian scholarship. And so, of course, I've been criticized also by some of these people here on YouTube that are doing these things, and there's a reason why. And we're going to be posting on today also Richard Kelly's podcast, and Richard Kelly actually is before this darling couple on YouTube of XJW activism. Well, Richard Kelly has been a guy who's held to similar views. Probably not the whole Satan is Yahweh diatribe, but he has, for example, Richard Kelly holds to a form of Gnostic Christianity. He's probably like a Jesus Seminar guy. And the Jesus Seminar are a bunch of scholars who really consider themselves Christians, even though they don't believe Jesus is God. They don't believe the mainstream doctrines of Christianity, and yet they would call themselves Christians, and under the guise of what you would think is Christian. But for example, no one can. I am, for example, a Washington Redskins fan. And, of course, a Washington Redskins fan is loyal to the Washington Redskins. That's why I am a fan of the Washington Redskins, or a fanatic for my football team here in D.C. But it would be an oxymoron to say I'm a Washington Redskins fan and a Dallas Cowboys fan. Well, I mean, where do your loyalties lie then? The question is. Or do you really consider yourself a truly faithful fan? Or how do you define the word fan? So all of those questions come into question when we're talking about fans. So this goes now, as far as activism is concerned. This goes back to the fact that the Watchtower or Jehovah's Witness activist community, at least the YouTube community, even on Facebook actually. And I think that some of us have more loyalties towards YouTube or prefer YouTube over Facebook, and some of us have more loyalties to Facebook. We all have forms of social media that we favor, and for years I was on iTunes, and that's what I favored. I went to Facebook, and now I'm really at the back end of coming onto YouTube and trying to adapt myself to the technology of video advancement. Of course, Facebook now inculcates video with Facebook Live. So this leads to my the reasons why I had Dr. Paul Copan and Dr. David Lamb on. And Dr. David Lamb wrote a book called, um, I think, what was it called? God Behaving Badly. God Behaving Badly. And Dr. Paul Copan wrote a book called Is God a Moral Monster? And the reason why I had these two gentlemen on was uh, what I was able to have them on when I wouldn't have had them on years ago, because now there is such a great plethora of attacks on Christianity, not just from Jehovah's Witnesses, not just from the Mormons, and I've had, you know, those topics covered on Blog Talk Radio, but now I'm having attacks on Christianity from within the XJW community and its various views, and of course attacks on Christianity as far as the concerning of the Bible. And so some of us have come out and we have rushed into the scene of becoming guidance counselors for other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, even though we have not really developed our own form of guidance. You know, we are experimenting with others because we're experimenting with our own selves and have not developed our theology, developed our philosophy completely, and are still a work in progress. But the casualties, of course, come in social media is that while you are yourself working through things, you're also, you know, others are now working it through you, and they can become a casualty of your own philosophy. And years ago, we didn't have that microwave attempt. We didn't have social media. We did not have. We worked those things out through private study, through just living in the real world and healing amongst normal society. And I will say that, yeah, social media does bring normal society to us, but it's still not the same conditions of actually healing under normal conditions, because you have a platform, you have a means to put yourself, to have the mic, so to speak, and I have a mic right here, and you put yourself in a position where you are just a bit higher than those who are unwilling to do what you're doing. And there takes courage to do what you're doing, because whenever you have a voice, then you're going to have criticism. But also in social media, it's much more popular that when you have a voice, you will have a following, no matter what criticism you will have. I mean, no doubt. Was it a couple months ago? I had, I think, like 140 subscribers, and now I'm about to get I'm close to getting 500 subscribers, because what I've said has, as a voice, has reached certain people, and there's a certain group of people that are do like my views or the bias that they may have, or even the content of what I'm going to offer the public. And so it's real easy to get lost in having a platform, and as a person who was a former pastor, I can understand that also, because, you know, when you're in charge of a group of people, it's real easy to really think much of yourself. You know, when you get so much flattery, it gets to your head, and you have to really work hard to become humble and to be humble. So what I wanted to talk about, as far as Dr. Paul Copan and David Lamb is concerned, is they both brought something to the table on the Old Testament God. And for years, this book right here, the Bible, we as Jehovah's Witnesses used to go through the Old Testament, and now, you know, it brought memory to me some things that that I had forgotten. And what has happened is, through controversy Walter Martin once said, controversy for the sake of controversy is a sin, but controversy for the sake of truth is a divine command. And that is that we're just going to go ahead and make a big fuss about things just to kick a big fuss. You know, that's of course unproductive. But if we have a goal in talking about controversial topics like homosexuality next week, and that is the goal is finding truth, and that there is such thing as absolute truth, that there are not gray areas on certain things, and some of us will say that there are gray areas, but you know, things like within the Christian community, what defines a Christian is not gray. You know, the fact is that we can go through history and we can see what Christians believed. In fact, Barbara Anderson had to go. Barbara Anderson, who used to write articles for the Watchtower and Awake magazines, and she was a Watchtower headquarters worker. Barbara Anderson said that she was given the goal by Ted Jarris, then governing body member, it's long passed away now, to see if she can trace the doctrines of the Watchtower Society through history. And I actually discussed a little bit about apostasy and historic Christianity. You can check out that video. It's a couple videos back here in our video archive here on YouTube. And I think I simulcasted it on iTunes. So it's on Blog Talk Radio also. If you're a listener on Blog Talk Radio, check out that either on YouTube. You can actually check it on YouTube and you can see the slides because you didn't get to see them on iTunes. But Barbara Anderson had the goal of, you know, really showing that Jehovah's Witnesses have a lineage, and I think a lineage and a legacy are important. And of course, she couldn't prove it because a lot of the doctrines that Christians hold to dear are the things that have been withstood the strands of time. They haven't changed. You know, there was no new light, so to speak. There are certain things that Christianity has always taught, going all the way back to the days of Jesus. And one of those things is the teaching of hell. And Jesus, of course, talks about hell. He gives a parable about it called the rich man and Lazarus. Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew says that do not fear those who can kill the body, but fear him or fear God who can destroy both body and soul in the place called hell. And so he makes the difference. He doesn't equivocate the two of biological death with the type of death that God can bring. And so he actually then redefines the whole idea that, that death is simply a material end or a biological end. He talks about death in a different way. First of all, he talks about those who can kill the body, but he doesn't repeat that term when he says body and soul. He says only God can kill both body and soul. So what does that mean? Is death a synonym for conscious cessation? And we find that not to be the case. Not with Jesus, because he speaks of death as having a consciousness even after this body has been killed. He says only God, though. He doesn't say God can kill the body. He says God can destroy both body and soul. So why does he use a different verb? And that is because the idea of kill is, of course, to make our biological life cease. But destruction is not exactly the same as kill. You can't kill a soul, you have to destroy a soul. So does destruction, or apalume, which is the Greek word, infer a cessation of biological existence? Of course it doesn't, because he says there's a place where that destruction takes place, in the place called Gehenna, in the place called hell. So it's a place in the afterlife where destruction is taking place of both body and soul. And of course, all of these involve concepts that we lost when we were in the cult of the Jehovah's Witnesses, because the Jehovah's Witnesses really misconstrue the whole idea of death. They actually buy into a more atheistic definition of death. And so, once again, it's about reprogramming our cultic mindset away from those things. I have a friend, I think it was Alessandro, who shared with me about a guy on Reddit. I think the social media platform is Reddit. And the guy supposedly had this vision, and this vision of hell where he saw a Jehovah's Witness lady being tortured by demons. And one of the ways that you can tell whether a person's supposed visions are false visions, just like you can tell Jehovah's Witnesses prophecies are false prophecies, is to test them by Scripture. And once you know Scripture, you can understand when someone, once you know what a real dollar bill looks like, you can tell when someone is giving you a fake dollar bill. And in fact, that's what they do in the Treasury Department. They don't teach people how to actually spot a counterfeit. They teach a person how to spot a counterfeit by understanding what the authentic looks like, so they can spot the counterfeit because they know that what the difference is from the authentic. They study the truth or the true dollar bill. And so the reason why I know that this vision was false, because it involves demons torturing people, and not just the Jehovah's Witness lady. I heard his testimony about demons torturing others. And we know that the Bible says that the lake of fire, that is that hell was created for the devil and his demons. So it's not a place where the devil and demons thrive, and they have, the devil has a pitchfork, and he's like Tom Cat. I don't know if you've ever seen Tom and Jerry, but there's an episode of Tom and Jerry where there's the devil Tom, and he's casting the cat Tom into hell because of attacking Jerry Mouse. So he has a pitchfork and he's shoving him in the pot, and the pot has fire, and so the devil does not conquer hell. He's not the Lord of the place of torment. The place of torment is fashioned for the devil and for his dark angels called demons. They will be tormented in hell, and those who follow them will also suffer the same abuse. Now, whether the question of that's unpalatable to you, or that's cruel, or there's something wrong with that picture, is irrelevant. And this is what happens for people that come out of the cults. People that come out of the Jehovah's Witnesses are kind of like never-Trumpers who won't accept the president. They have Trump derangement syndrome. Never-Trumpers will, I don't care what the president does is good, they will find something wrong with it. I'm sure that there were never Obamas also. People that hated Obama so much as president, no matter what he did, there was something wrong with what he was doing. They could not find a good deed that he had done, no matter what. And so we have inborn in us, many of us. And there are probably the exception, but there's only a few to that exception. At least my experience has been that. And the fact is that there's so many that come out of the Jehovah's Witnesses that have church or religion derangement syndrome. We easily still spew the cultic mantra of religion is a snare and a racket, and we have all kinds of problems with the Bible, and it's mostly just emotional baggage. It is really that we have become such spiritual snowflakes that we can't accept that no matter what, because that hurts our feelings. We think that's cruel, and we don't even want to know the reasoning behind it, the philosophy behind it, whether it has legitimacy. I am an apologist, and I think on Dr. Paul Copan's interview, which you guys will get to see today once again, Bonnie the atheist called in, and she accused Dr. Paul Copan of being an apologist, like there's something wrong with that, and that you need to go into the Bible neutrally. Well, the fact is that, me and Dr. Copan said it ourselves, that Bonnie herself is not some neutral observer of the Bible or neutral, unbiased spectator of the biblical text. In fact, she has a great deal of bias, and largely stemming from her rejection of the false religion she spent most of her life engaged in, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's the case for many of us. Many of us are so disenfranchised with religion, disenchanted with the Bible, disenchanted with Christianity, based upon our experience, which is not real experience, with religion within the confines of cultism. And in that respects, we've exited the cult. We continue to actually carry the same views that we had as cultists, because the cults teach us to have disdain for any form of Christianity outside of the cult. Religion is a snare and a racket, and we come out and we still spew that mantra, except now we just added Jehovah's Witnesses to it. That's all. That's the only thing that's changed. We've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. We think that because the Jehovah's Witnesses was wrong, all religion is wrong. That the Bible is wrong. That Christianity is wrong. And it's become our new enemy. Now, for many of us Watchtower activists, we are preoccupied with our activism against the cult, the Watchtower Society. It's definitely true. But what happens? What happens the day that the Watchtower falls? I think Down with the Tower was here in our chat room. He might still be on. I don't know. But what happens the day when the tower goes down? I mean, does our activism end then? Does then do we move on to something else? And believe it or not, some of us are moving on to something else. Those who have referred to me as Bible bullies, as a list that some people call me Bible bullies. The fact is that they're Bible snowflakes. That's what it is. And when they're challenged upon their views in a reasonable setting, instead of giving a reason for their reasons, they back down and just engender me with the title of Bible bully. And really the Bible bullies, a Bible bully is someone who takes advantage of others' ignorance. That's what a Bible bully is. And I will say that some of us activists are vastly ignorant, and assume a great deal about what Christians don't know, at least Christian apologists don't know. And the word apologist means to give a reason. That's what the word apologize means. Now you can sorrowfully apologize, but I don't sorrowfully apologize for anything. I am an apologist, as Bonnie called Dr. Paul Copan. That is, I give a reason or a defense or an answer for the faith that dwells within me. So as I said, I couldn't tell the false because I understood that a false vision of hell would be that demons and the devil are actually rulers or lords and torturing unfaithful people or sinners in hell. And that's not the vision that the Bible gives. The Bible doesn't mention the devil as being a lord of hell. It mentions the devil as being cast into hell. Yeah, he will be cast there. It mentions the place called the lake of fire. The devil will be cast into the lake of fire, and those who follow him. And this will be conscious. In the book of Revelation chapter 14, it says that they do not sleep day or night. They don't sleep because they're conscious. They are conscious of their punitive place, the place of their penalty, the place of their punishment. Now, whether they are the cause of that punishment or God is the active cause is a whole different subject. And there are two views on that. But the fact is that so many of us ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are so caught with church derangement syndrome, religion derangement syndrome, Christianity derangement syndrome, that instead of really investigating Christianity, we've put on our bootstraps of strawman arguments, and we've accepted what the Watchtower has taught us about Christianity, and we use that as the foundation of our fodder against Christianity, against the Bible, and against the followers of the Bible. And we will use any emotional baggage that we can use to our advantage instead of addressing clear, logical reasoning on this topic. And that's what's happened. There's been a movement in the XJW activist community, in the YouTube community, where some really respected members have taken it upon them to move away from Watchtower activism, and because they've gotten bored with that, and to move on to other cults, and they don't really know that much about the other cults. But they will talk about the Mormons, they will talk about the Adventists, and they will talk about evangelicals, and even question evangelical scholarship as biased, using whoever from a YouTube channel that they can use, and say, well, you know, evangelical scholarship is not true scholarship because it's a biased community, and yet they have their own biases against that community. They've sided themselves with liberal scholars, as in liberal scholars don't have those biases. You know, I will say this, okay, so you're going to get to see Richard Kelly on, and Richard Kelly has, you know, basically considers himself a Christian, and he does question the authenticity of the Gospels and a couple of other things. You know, I would say he's of those that really fall into a more Gnostic Christianity, Jesus Seminar type of Christianity, which really is no Christianity at all. I mean, you know, it's really stripped down Christianity, it's watered down Christianity to the point where, you know, Jesus doesn't even resemble Jesus. It's so watered down. It's like Kool-Aid without all the good sugar in it. You know, it's a little bit of the colored powder and a whole lot of water. But You know what makes Kool-Aid the sugar? I don't know if you've ever made Kool-Aid, but when I was a kid, I was a Kool-Aid expert. I think we all claim to be Kool-Aid experts, and I'm dating myself. We used to get the Kool-Aid in the little packet, right? And you put it in your gallon pitcher of water, or, quart pitcher of water. And you just knew how many scoops of sugar to put in there to make that thing taste just perfect. And so many of us, some of us have adopted a form of Kool-Aid without any sugar and just a little bit of powder. And that's not Kool-Aid. That tastes horrible, in fact. So, I mean, it's like Jehovah's Witnesses claiming to be the only true Christians, or the Seventh-day Adventists, or the Mormons. That's what the cults do. The cults are the ones who say we're the only true Christians, in light of the fact that there's a highway of Christianity throughout the ages that defy their views. That's what Charles and Maria Russell did. That couple, that old couple. They thought that they knew better. They left the Congregational Church, and they was going ahead and listening to some Christadelphians, and listening to some Second Adventists, and listening to some Millerites, and then they put it all together in this big batch of nasty, and they came up with their teachings. And it took a little while, because the first president, Charles H. Patton, was actually Trinitarian. And that's what's happening in the XJW activist community. Is it has taken a while, and some of us are now starting to develop our beliefs based upon our hatred or disdain for Christianity. And that's what Charles and Maria Russell did. That's what Ellen G. White did. That's what Joseph Smith did. Joseph Smith was a Methodist. Based upon his disdain for Methodism, which was a denomination or a form of mainstream Christianity, he decided to form his own. And some of us activists are no different than the Joseph Smiths and the Charles Taze Russells and the Judge Rutherfords, because Judge Rutherford also, he demonized some of Russell's teachings. He wasn't fond of the pyramid. He had to deal with the pyramid in order to get a following. But sometimes he just had to just push away from it a little bit at a time until he developed his own following. And when his following outgrew Russellism, then he could completely detach himself from Russell and then say the nasty things he wanted to say about Russell and his pyramid. Russell taught that Jesus came in 1874. And yet Rutherford believed that, held on to that teaching till 1919? Then he could detach himself, and he said 1914 was the day of Jesus' invisible presence, so that he could replace Russell's teaching. Bible students to this day still believe it's 1874. So that's the activist community right now. We're scattered. We really are. We're kind of a big... that's why I say that activism doesn't really save people. It doesn't really... Activism doesn't eradicate cultism. In some ways, activism only moves it to another place. And in some places on YouTube, activism is cultism. It's just another cult. Nathaniel Merrick wrote his book, saying Jehovah is Satan. He developed a following, it died out. Greg Stafford, who wrote Jehovah's Witnesses Defended. I was there when he wrote his first edition, and I was on the debate boards. This is early days of the internet with Greg Stafford. Robert Hummel, and a bunch of us guys, Sam Shimon, um, Dave Sherrill. We used to be on a board called Trinity Discussion Board with Greg Stafford and other Watchtower apologists. And then Greg came out with his first edition book, and I told Greg, I can't wait for you to write the book of you absolving your Watchtower beliefs, because the minute you write a book outside of the Watchtower literature, you've already apostatized, even if you are defending Jehovah's Witnesses. And the second book, he moved further away from Jehovah's Witnesses. By the third edition, the third edition of Greg Stafford's book, Jehovah's Witnesses Defended, he doesn't call Jehovah's organization Jehovah's Witnesses anymore, because by the third edition, he's, I think he disassociated himself or was disfellowshipped. He was a minister, a servant for years, but the brothers kept telling him to really absolve his things that he was doing on the internet. And to be honest with you, Greg thought that he knew better than the governing body. He was trying to steal their thunder. He thought he was smarter than them. And I will say he probably is. He probably is, but you can't be smarter than the governing body, because the governing body has a larger following. So when you come up against the governing body, I don't care how smart you are, you're not going to beat them at the game of who is Jehovah's spiritual channel. I mean, the minute you start questioning them as Jehovah's spiritual channel, the question is, are you Jehovah's spiritual channel? Who are you to question Jehovah's spiritual channel? Are you claiming you're Jehovah's spiritual channel? Well, in a sense, without saying so, Greg was. Because, see, then he started his group called Christian Witnesses of Jah. And we see it happening all over. Women in the Wilderness and Pearl-doxy. Pearl-doxy and Women in the Wilderness is just Watchtower regurgitation. A bunch of old grannies up there in the United Kingdom who think that Pearl-doxy is the anointed one. And so, no one else can be anointed except for Pearl-doxy. And they're on Facebook. And they're just a little cult of ex-Jehovah Witness activists that are still thinking like Jehovah's Witnesses. Some is more obvious than others. Some are just no different than Pearl-doxy and Women in the Watchtower, Greg Stafford. But we have YouTube channels, and we call ourselves Fighting for the Watchtower. But, we've developed our own forms of theology, and we're fighting against Christianity. And yet we still say we believe in Jesus. Jesus, who had 12 disciples called apostles, and those apostles passed on their teaching. And the Holy Spirit was working with those apostles and teaching that was passed on to the churches and the upper room. And that Holy Spirit either failed miserably and Christianity is lost. And the minute that you say Christianity is lost, you've opened the door for you to be the next cult. Because if you claim to be a Christian, if you claim to be a follower of Jesus, and you say Christianity is lost, what makes you think you're not the one that's lost too? I mean, for you to pinpoint Christianity to be lost, then that means that you have to have truth. That means you become the new Grand Poobah. That means you become the next apostle. That means that you're the next governing body. That means that if you have so many subscribers on YouTube that will listen to your garbage, I only have 482, and here I am criticizing the very social community that I'm trying to reach out to. And that is that, recognizing the fact that we need healing. That's the name of this outreach, Healing X Outreach. We need to heal from cultism. And that takes time. That takes study. And that takes time away from this constant barrage of voices. And it takes prayer. We're down, I think we've been on for an hour. And I just, hold on, let me go ahead. I'm looking for my mouse. All right, alrighty. If you have any questions or comments, press 1 on, press 1, and I will then go ahead and put you on the air. If not, then, you know, or you have any, let me go ahead and look in the chat room, to the chat line. Yeah, see, down with the tower, you're saying that the Bible condemns itself. I don't think so. The Bible doesn't condemn itself. All right. Well, okay. Yeah. I do know Down with the Tower is an atheist. So, yeah. And there's certain things that I've given Down with the Tower to research, because I don't think you've done exhaustive research. If you are a atheist and you are an ex-Jehovah's Witness and you really want to do some research, first of all, let me recommend Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ. That's a book and a movie. He is a former atheist, and he was a journalist at the Chicago Tribune. There are also, there's a great deal of J. Warner Wallace. Look him up. Just do a search on the internet for J. Warner Wallace, and I think that his videos are also on YouTube. And also, I would say, you know, really examine the Bible and how it, let's see. The Bible says that all Scripture is inspired of God and beneficial for teaching. And of course, when Paul wrote that, he's specifically speaking of the Old Testament. Now, I haven't gotten around to what I was going to say about Paul Copan and David Lamb, and the thing that I had realized. Now, for years, I had understood that the Old Testament was temporal. That is, the Mosaic Law, the Levitical laws were written for the Jews, for the people of Israel, and especially that argument is used, especially so against the Seventh-day Adventist Church, because the Seventh-day Adventists are Sabbatarians, and they believe that they have to live by the Old Testament, and so they believe in the Old Testament Sabbath. And so there's a great deal of apologetics in debunking the idea of the Old Testament Sabbath applying to New Testament Christians, because we know that by the end of the first century, New Testament Christians were not observing the Saturday Sabbath. You know, first of all, they didn't even have a Saturday, because that's the Gregorian calendar. The days of the week didn't come out until much later. The way they describe the days of the week in the New Testament is they called it the first day, the second day, the seventh day, you know. And we do know that in the New Testament, you have Christians meeting and worshiping on the first and eighth day of the week. They called it the eighth day. And the eighth day was, of course, Sunday. I know we say 7 days of the week, but they would start, of course, with Saturday and then go back to Sunday, and then Sunday would become the eighth day. And so that's how they numerically counted the days of the week, as 8 days. And so, yeah, the Bible makes it very clear that they were meeting on the first day of the week, breaking bread and singing songs and worshiping, and that Jesus himself rose on the first day of the week. And there's a great deal of apologetics in defending the reason why Christians worship on Sundays, on the first day of the week, as opposed to Saturday Sabbath, where Jews, of course, still observe the Sabbath, and so do Seventh-day Adventists. And of course, the Adventists were the precursors to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and the precursors to the Seventh-day Adventists was a group called the Seventh-day Baptists, which William Miller was a pastor of, the Seventh-day Baptists. And he adopted some of his views from British Israelism, and that's what really developed the Millerite doctrine, was British Israelism and the teachings of the Seventh-day Baptists. But what I come to realize, and if you read the book of Hebrews chapter 9, talks about the tabernacle arrangement. And, of course, they had the tabernacle in the wilderness, which would, of course, later on become the temple arrangement when they built a temple in Jerusalem. And they built the first temple under Cyrus. And I think Herod built the temple again once it was destroyed, the second temple. And so we know that these things about the Old Testament were for a temporal guide for the Old Testament peoples, because the Old Testament peoples were savages. And you don't need me to convince you that they were savages if you read the Old Testament Bible. I mean, you have Noah's sons exposing their father's nakedness. And it's not simply exposing their father's nakedness. The intimation there is that one of his sons actually, which we know that you had that one of his sons was cursed. The reason why the curse was placed upon him was because what he did wasn't simply that he exposed his father's nakedness when his father was drunk, but that he committed possibly a homosexual act on his father. And so that just tells you the savagery of the Old Testament peoples prior to Israel. And if you do a real search of the Jewish people, they are a called out people. They were called out of the land of Canaan. Abraham came from the land of Ur, where the Chaldeans were. He was a descendant of the Akkadians, the second oldest civilization known to man. And the Akkadians came from the Sumerians, who are the oldest known civilization to man. And we find that there are similarities, for example, in the Mosaic Law, and there's some question whether Hammurabi's law code came either prior or after the Mosaic Law. And so we see these similarities. And of course, Hammurabi's law code is far more treacherous and savage than the Mosaic law code and the Levitical law code, which was, for that time, like going from a Volkswagen Beetle to a Maserati. And so God is trying to lift a savage people out of this savagery, trying to make them more civilized. And that's the same way with the Old Testament tabernacle sacrifice. I mean, they did these sacrifices because they were a portrayal, they were a rehearsal for the perfect, better sacrifice to come. It was literally a way of, through repetition, of understanding their deliverance and how it was going to come. And it was really a repetitious way of really spotting the Messiah when he would come. Everything they did in the Old Testament tabernacle arrangement, in the Old Testament in general, the Mosaic law, was a slow way of lifting them up out of a culture of savagery, which they were inherent and familiar with. It's like if we took someone out of native Iran today, an absolute Shiite Muslim, Sharia law believing Muslim, and we were to bring them involved into Western civilization and accepting them to accept Western civilization as it is. What we're seeing in Europe, for example, is a problem right now. You have Muslims who follow Sharia law, which is no doubt a backwards society. We're talking about a society which involves incest. We're talking about a society that allows the marriage of little girls to grown men. We're talking about a society that kills homosexuals. You can't be an admitted homosexual in that society. They will take you off the top of a building and drop you head first. You're talking about a society where a wife cannot leave the house without her husband's permission. If she does, she can be killed, either by the public for breaking the law or by her husband. A woman can't even drive a car without her husband's permission. She can be put to death for doing so. A society which believes alcohol, any form of alcohol being allowed, is sinful and a crime. And what we have right now going on in Europe is entire neighborhoods where this type of culture exists, where they are receiving welfare and they're getting free housing, free money, and free food, and they are making demands on the type of food that they are receiving, even though it's free food for consumption, because they will not eat food that is halal. And halal according to Islamic standards, not Jewish standards, which means they will not eat certain meat. It has to be bled a certain way. It has to be blessed by an imam before they eat it. People that are in abject poverty are making demands on their menu. So you take people like that and you bring them into a country, and their whole objective is not only to beg and to demand things their way, but also from the time that they are in their country, their whole objective is through birthright to take over and invade the country, to take over its governing positions, and to transform it into an Islamic theocracy. So you can't just take people like that from a culture so backwards and fast forward them and expect them to get acclimated. They have to be educated and be willing to be acclimated, which is why immigration is important in this country. You know, in the United States, immigration is a process. It's not you just come at the border and I want to come into the country. No, before you come into the country, you have to learn about the Constitution. You have to learn about the laws. You have to learn some of our history. And then you have to say that you accept the history, the laws, the regulation, and the philosophy of this nation. And until you adopt that and swear that you adopt that, which means that you promise, that you vow that this is going to be now your new way of living, then you can't be acclimated. And what you have here is God slowly transitioning his people that he called out of savagery, out of butchery, out of cannibalism, out of incest, out of child sacrifices, out of the worst culture there is. Because we got to remember, the whole Noahic flood account is about the world being so absolutely abject into sin, so absolutely unable to convert to God's ways, that he says, I'm going to wipe them out. That is what Dr. David Lamb and Dr. Paul Copan attempt to tell us in their book. That God was being loving. God was being long-suffering. That now gives the word long-suffering truly its meaning. God had to suffer longly with a people that was so backwards, so abject in the type of mentality that they were in. They had to slowly be brought out of it. Only in the Old Testament Judaic culture do we find women as rulers, as judges in the nation of Israel. In other cultures where women were worthless. Only in the Judaic culture that was called out do we have a law which actually frees slaves from their debts every 7 years and every 50th year. It's like a bankruptcy law. You work out your wages, and then I don't care how much you owe. You could still be in debt. On that 7th year, you're free, no matter how much debt you had. It's because God is slowly bringing these people out and slowly showing them the importance of faithfulness and obedience to him. When they listened to him, they prospered. When they didn't, he acted quickly. Because when they didn't, they truly disrespected the very things that God was trying to do. All righty, let me go back to if anybody has any questions, just press 1. We are now almost near the end of our podcast, and this is our test on this suite. And not too many for our first time. I think we have 4 people in our chat room. And so as we continue on, we'll get more people in the chat room. We'll actually advance this a lot more, and people will get used to this being at 1 o'clock on Saturdays. So the whole measure of Paul Copan and Dr. David Lamb is one, first of all, I think we overreact to some of these scriptures. We read it emotionally. I think that many XJW activists are spiritual snowflakes and overly emotional and not really reasoning logically about some of these things. I do recommend Paul Copan and Dr. David Lamb's websites and books. I think paulcopan.com and davidlamb.com. And they also have their books, is God Behaving Badly and God Behaving Badly and Is God a Moral Monster? And so I think the bottom line is that XJW activists pretty much coming out of the cults do away with anything that they find unpalatable. If they find the Old Testament God unpalatable, let's get rid of it. If they find teachings of hell unpalatable, let's get rid of it. And but some of us, we won't get rid of Jesus. We try to water down Jesus enough to act like he doesn't teach about hell, to act like he doesn't approve of the Old Testament when Jesus himself says, not a jot or tittle shall pass away concerning the law of the Old Testament. And so we try to paint Jesus as some lovey-dovey hippie, some New Testament wimp and not recognize Jesus for being who he was, a man who was, first of all, God in the flesh, who spoke about hell, who spoke about his second judgment and his coming. We try to paint the Old Testament as some really abnormal thing when we have same incidents happening in the New Testament. You know, in the book of Corinthians, it talked about those that were falling asleep in death for partaking in the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner. Some fell asleep, and some got sick. We forget the fact that God strikes a man dead who himself called himself a God. We forget the fact that the scriptures talks about Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts, and how Ananias, didn't give as much as he said he was going to give, and because he lied to God, he dies instantly right there on the spot. And Peter says, "You didn't lie. You didn't lie to me. You lied to the Holy Spirit. You lied to God." And boom, he dies. And then his wife comes in through the room right behind him, and guess what? Boom, she dies too with her husband. So we act like God wasn't striking people dead in the New Testament. We try to whitewash history and try to make it seem like, well, Jesus, his father is not the God of the Old Testament. And that's baloney. Not only is Jesus' father the God of the Old Testament, but Jesus oftentimes is the God of the Old Testament doing these things, striking people dead. And it was happening in the New Testament, and it's going to happen to come in the book of Revelation. So with that being said, we're down to the last 8 minutes, and I just want to go ahead and say thank you for this is our test live stream. And if you really want to go ahead and follow us, subscribe to us on YouTube, and subscribe to us on blogtalkradio.com/HealingX Outreach. We come on every single Saturday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. You can listen to us on iTunes. You can subscribe to us on Blog Talk Radio. And sometimes we have a retelecast, and you can listen to the retelecast because some of you may not have heard them. I'm putting, my daughter's actually putting as many as we can up on the YouTube channel, so you get to hear some of these things. But this is going to become more of a habit. We're going to get acclimated to this technology, and we will do more live streams on Facebook and YouTube. And this will become more of a habitual thing rather than an extraordinary thing. So God bless you. Check us out next week. We're going to have Pastor Chris and Beth Agni. And we're going to try to either Facebook live stream or YouTube live stream that one also. And call in at 1-347-934-0379 and ask your questions. Beth is going to she's going to give her testimony, and then we'll have a little discussion with Pastor Chris about why Christians should not endorse gay unions. And I'm going to play devil's advocate, and maybe you can play a little devil's advocate with Pastor Chris on that. And afterward, the week after, we're going to have XJW Born, he has a YouTube channel here, and he's going to be sharing his testimony at the Witnesses Now for Jesus Convention in October. So you all have a blessed day and a blessed week. And let me go say bye-bye. Please pray for Jehovah's Witnesses.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.
And how do I end?
OBS.
This one?
No, it's Audacity.
Oh.
Just hit stop.
Get that water right there.
Just hit,
Never the whole
no, it's right there.
Oh, okay.
Hold on.
Yeah, you still have you haven't only used 25% of your